Yeah. Yeah, really good. I mean, it was really crowded when I went in there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But they were excellent. They were excellent.
Good.
Derek's not into that for
They
sure.
got that whole new wing. Did you go there?
No, just the amazing.
All right. We'll call to order the Falls Church Planning Commission meeting of April 3rd, 2024. Mr. Train, will you call the roll, please?
Yeah. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Friedlander?
Here.
Mr. Puentes?
Here.
Ms. Comont?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
I know Mr. Heyer will not be here. We'll wait for Mr. Krasner. We have a pretty straightforward agenda, a couple minor action items, and then 2 work session items. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's approved. Okay. We have nobody for the speaker series. Mr. Trainer, do we have any written correspondence?
No, Mr. Chair.
And are anybody here for in-person petitions?
I did not receive any requests to speak tonight.
Okay. Moving into action items then, number 6, we have the Planning Commission meeting minutes of March 20th. Any comments from commissioners on the minutes? I actually have just one minor thing on line 279, where it says indicated a commute trip data is a distraction for the low numbers. I may have not been clear. I would change that to Mr. Puentes recommended using a metric other than commute trips, since work-related trips are not the main reason most people bicycle. Wasn't trying to fudge the numbers, just saying that.
Other than the commute trip?
Recommend using a metric other than commute trips, since work-related trips are not the main reason most people bicycle. Okay.
Was it most people bicycle? Yeah.
Any other comments on the minutes? Any motion to approve?
Move to approve the meeting minutes from March 20th.
Second?
Moved
Second?
and seconded by Mr. Stevens. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Item 7, work session, greening of Lincoln presentation. Mr. Stoddard?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm happy to briefly set up the discussion before I turn it over to Tony Dudley, who is the project manager on this one. But this item is before you as an update and a request for comment and feedback. This is part of the greening of Lincoln capital improvement project. It runs most of the length of Lincoln Avenue. It has been out to several community engagements. It's been talked about with the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation. At this point, based on the adopted CIP and the available funding, the scope of the project is set. At this point, we're already at 30% design, so the basic geometry is set as well. So what we're looking for is to share that information with you and to collect your feedback within that framework as we head into ultimately 90% design. And of course, this project is running on something of a fixed schedule since we want to get the funds encumbered before the end of the calendar year so that we can hold on to those grant funds. But with that, as a way of setup, I'll turn it over to Tony Dudley.
Good evening, everyone. How are you today?
Good, welcome.
Can everyone hear me? I have a voice meant for the theater, so I probably don't need this thing. So if I get too loud, just please let me know. I'll say this is for the people at home. How's that? Okay, so today I'm here to talk about the greening of Lincoln Stormwater and Pedestrian Improvement Project. Sorry, sometimes we call it a sidewalk project, pedestrian improvement project. But I can say that the goals the goals of the project are to improve stormwater conditions on and along Lincoln Avenue, as well as the sidewalk connected to those stormwater components. I just hit the advance. As you can see in this particular slide, you have Lincoln Avenue. Is this a pointer too? Oh yeah. It's kind of weak though, so we won't use it. This is Lincoln Avenue. The project goes from Northwest Street down to the Arlington County line. You see the intersections there at Spring. Also, Oak is there. I'm sorry, it's off the page. Greenwich, Great Falls, Meridian, Walden, and Yucatan. Yucatan is the last cross street. Well, can't call it a cross street because it's actually kind of a T intersection there. So that's kind of the extent of the project. A little history. Back in 2021, well, maybe I should say back before 2021, I was actually here in March of 2021. I started at that time, but prior to that, there was some type of project that I hear from the residents out there now that I'm talking to them that dealt with trying to improve the sidewalks at that time. I believe it was called Greening of Lincoln, and I believe it was it may have also included traffic calming, which at the time required some type of vote in the neighborhood for the project to be done, and the project actually lost in that vote, and so you have Lincoln the way you have it today, essentially. But in March of 2021, a new kind of round of citizenry came along and got together and put together a kind of wish list of things they would want to have out there as far as traffic calming and pedestrians were concerned. And they also did things like send out questionnaires and do questionnaires on what the neighborhood wanted, what the people in the blocks wanted, and they separated by blocks and everything else. So there was a lot of work done from that end on trying to get some type of movement going. Well, we also, at the same time, the Stormwater Advisory Committee put together a list of projects that they wanted to see done related to stormwater. One of them was Lincoln Avenue. So the two kind of crossed over one another, The two kind of crossed over one another and became the Greening of Lincoln project. We've met with the CACT about the transportation issues regarding sidewalks and slowing traffic and those things. We had a wish list of items from the neighborhood out there that came prior to this. That's why I tell you later, nothing in this plan was thought of like by me or anyone in DPW staff. It was actually the things that came straight from the citizenry are the things that we looked at trying to implement. We had our city council presentation in January 16, 2024. Excuse me if I could catch my breath just a second. Sorry about that. We had a city council presentation in January. Our first public meeting was in February of this year, and we're sliding into April where we plan to have more block meetings coming up at the end of April, the 1st of May, where I'll go out and I'll talk to each area kind of individually. And that kind of stems from the need to do a walk and talk, I guess they call it. We did one for Park Avenue. But I figured getting 90 plus people together and walking down Lincoln Avenue during the evening would cause a traffic situation. So I figured we could break that up into groups and do it that way. And I've actually had the chance to meet with some of the groups out there in a group setting, especially at the top of the hill, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Oh, sorry. Okay, so our project goals were focusing on flood mitigation and water quality enhancements. Where did we have the flooding in the roads? What kind of house flooding, yard flooding that we were dealing with? Not that we put a lot of emphasis on yard flooding because we expect that in some instances, but what kind of yard flooding and what kind of house adjacent flooding was happening in the area? We wanted to focus on that first. Next, we wanted to deal with enhanced green space. We wanted to reduce the impervious area out there overall by by a mix of things like porous pavement, as well as additional green space in the area. So those were our two biggest issues, because the grant, $4 million grant from the state, it's an ARPA grant, allows us to do this kind of stuff, but it's geared towards stormwater, not necessarily traffic control or pedestrian safety or anything like that. It's all geared towards that. But back in 2021, council stated that it wanted to bring on items into its infrastructure, such as green infrastructure. And so this is the first project that we're kind of putting that forward in. Of course, we were looking at ADA compliance, because right now we don't have that out there. We have areas where the telephone poles are right in the middle of the sidewalks. We don't have ramps, things like that. Traffic calming, by narrowing the roads, we wanted to slow traffic down. We're also reducing the speed limit out there to 20 miles per hour. And then also we wanted to increase pedestrian safety by providing crosswalks, raised crosswalks in areas where they can be seen. So on funding for this, we have a total of $5 million. We have $4 million from the state ARPA, about $1 million from the federal ARPA that we had, that we got back in '22. The project is audited by the state for stormwater construction line items. We say that because things like raised crosswalks, that grant can't pay for. We'll have to find another way to pay for that. And that's kind of part of that additional city funding that we'll have to come up with. There have been also some discussions of missing link sidewalks in certain areas of the project that, although nice to do, this grant money can't pay for that. So we have to find additional money somewhere else to do that. We also have $2.7 million in roadway rebed construction, road bed reconstruction, set for that road already. We're moving that up to FY25 to coincide with the Greening of Lincoln project, so we can tear up the road all at one time and then replace it back all bit from the base up, essentially. Like I said, there would be additional funding. I think council is aware of that. I'm not sure what the outcome will be from that standpoint, but there will be additional monies needed for additional sidewalks, like I talked about, sidewalk widening. There's been some discussion of 6-foot sidewalks out there, project-wide, as well as the crosswalks and any other totally traffic or pedestrian items and not necessarily connected to stormwater. We did get the state to pay for most of the sidewalk on the south side because we are trying to reduce the impervious area overall, and that's geared towards, and put in BMPs out there, and that's geared towards stormwater, so they allowed that. Okay, so you can see our study area. The watersheds that we are dealing with essentially are Cove Branch. Everybody knows Cove Branch, the open stream just south of Broad Street, down by the Broadway. You have Trammell Branch, which is over where we just did a project, just at the intersection where the WNOD trail crosses Little Falls. We have the Shadow Walk branch, which is the area just in the orange that's just upstream from the Trammell branch. And then also we had Ellison Branch at the very end where we've seen some flooding before. This is kind of at one time glance at the flooding that we have out there. This is just for the 10-year storm event. So, of course, there are larger storm events out there. We have modeled those events, but these are the ones that typically our ordinances are focused on, the 10-year event. So we've got a lot of localized flooding. We've got some undersized pipes, which are generally the cause of the backup. We also have some old pipes out there. Some of those pipes, especially, I'm going to point to them. I think y'all hear me. Especially in this area here, right at Great Falls and Lincoln. Then there's another one down here, close to, it's not Yucatan, it's Meridian, that one escapes my mind right now. And then there's Yucatan, Walton Court. So we have a problem down here, and all of this stuff here and here is old corrugated metal pipe that was put in by God knows who, God knows when, connected into the railroad where that was put in, who knows when. So at least we're going to be looking at those areas for pipe replacement, just so we don't run into any issues in the future, such as we call them blowouts. It's when a lot of times when these pipes go under pressure, when a large rain event comes, these pipes will go under pressure flow, and the pipes aren't made for that, and so they will literally burst, and it shows up as a sinkhole, essentially. So we call it a blowout, but it actually shows up as a sinkhole. Here's a look at that very upstream area on Ellison Branch. What we're focused on here is actually the lighter blue water up on Lincoln Avenue there. The deeper water you see is there adjacent to the W Endo Trail. And we have studies that looked at that area. Right now, we're just going to kind of deal with the situation on Lincoln because it's controllable with the funding and work we have to do. But the other areas are next on our list of things that we need to take a closer look at. We do have some places where we could do some improvements there, but we'll see about that a little later. That's a picture of the park. We're going to try to straighten that out, do some grading in the park so we don't have that kind of issue anymore. Our current sidewalk conditions, you can see what we got going on there, poles in the middle of the street, they're cracking. We're trying to put in new sidewalk. There's been 6-foot sidewalk proposed project-wide. I don't know if we will be able to fit the sidewalk in here and keep things like parking and stuff like that, things that people want to keep. So we'll have to see to that. But the idea is to abandon that portion of the sidewalk that's behind the pole in many cases and build to the street side of the pole, the sidewalk that is. But we do have issues with failing pavement. We have speed control issues out there. Again, we're lowering the speed limit to 20 miles an hour, and we're trying to, and of course, the pedestrian safety issues. So our considerations were our existing conditions in stormwater, and how can we fix them? What is the grant money going to be able to pay for? That's another big one, is what the grant money would be able to pay for. And would we be in compliance with the grant? Some other components on the roadway and sidewalk included perceived property boundaries. A lot of people tend to adopt that part of their property that is right in front of them, thinking it's their property when in fact it's city right of way. So we have those types of hurdles to overcome as well. As a matter of fact, that was the very first call that I got about this project was, I don't want you to take my wall. That was the very first call I got. And so, I knew the races were on at that point because that would be a lot of people would have that same notion. And this is available, this I won't go through it word by word, but this is available to you if you want to. I'm always available for questions if you like. Oh, sorry. So this is the decision matrix that we came up with as far as trying to adopt as many of the components as the neighborhood wanted, while keeping budget in mind and keeping what we can do with these grants in mind, things like that. So, for example, there would probably, I don't know, did anybody attend the public meeting that we had? Okay. If you had, and I'd ask the question, how many people want a roundabout at Great Falls and Lincoln? Probably half the crowd would have thrown their hand up in the air. Well, we don't have the resources to make a roundabout at Lincoln. And not only don't we have the resources, but we don't have the land to make a roundabout out of Lincoln. And that's an extreme ask, but it was an ask. It was like, can we do this kind of thing? So we had to develop some processes to be able to, politely turn things down, of course. And that's what this decision matrix is all about. And we went through everything: roadway elements, pedestrian facilities, and some of the features that we want to implement out there as far as green infrastructure are concerned include these types of stormwater BMPs. These actually were in DC, but it's the DC standards that we're looking at to implement these because they have a much more urban feel to them and they fit into our existing environment. Whereas Virginia really doesn't go into much detail about how to build these things in an environment like ours. There's a lot of assumptions made, so we have to take from some of our neighbors that have done this before. And so we will heavily rely on standards from DC in order to implement these, what they call pocket BMPs, because they're built to fit into our type of community. Okay. Here's an extreme example of underwater detention and porous pavement. There are a few areas that are going to look like this along this street there. Places where we have lower sags, or places where we're trying to control runoff in a sheet flow format, will get that kind of treatment. Places where we have a large amount of water coming through will get more of an underground detention component. It probably won't be made out of concrete because that's very expensive, but we can make it out of the newer materials that bring down that cost. And I can tell you some good news is on the project is the American Legion happens to own the property that most of the Cove Branch water drains through. And they have agreed to allow us to provide underground detention on their lot where that house is currently, and they intend to only use it for recreational use from that point on. So that's really good news because we're able to capture some of that runoff and store it before it gets down further. This same system runs under Park Avenue, then down to Broad Street. So, and our long-term goals include components on Park Avenue, on and around Park Avenue, as well as eventually work on Broad Street in order to help down by the Broadway. So that's a really, I'm very thankful for that. And he just called me the other day to verify that, yeah, that's what we want to do, because he had his meeting with all of his members, and they pretty much said that, yes, they want to do that. This is just an example cross-section of, we do plan on putting some detention in and around the park. Probably along the street there, as long as we can stay out of the utilities. But that is a plan of ours, and we've talked to Park and Rec, and they're fully on board with that. So our next steps, our design phase begins, and we're right in the middle of it. That early stuff, the early planning, like where is this going to go? I'm going door to door. Feels like I'm running for mayor, actually. Going door to door, asking, people, hey, where you want, is this where, could you live with this? What's your biggest issue? What do you care about the most? And it's different for different folk, yes, a lot of people care about the parking. Okay, because we do reduce parking. Some numbers have it in the neighborhood of 50%. That's good. We need to reduce the impervious area. That's a key issue. This is an environmental project. The side benefits are traffic control and pedestrian safety, but at the end of the day, it's a stormwater project. So we are in that phase. I'm having meetings now with everyone. I have meetings planned for the end of this month and early next month for the blocks, as I talked about before. And then that'll roll us into a 30% design. I've been asked to come back to the public at 30% to discuss with them. And I know he said we were at 30%. 30% is 30% design includes things like getting your survey, getting your utility components, finding out where your overhead lines are, as well as knowing what elements you're going to put into your project and approximately where. Right now, we're really fine tuning it, and that's the part that gets us to that full 30% as far as I'm concerned. So we've been asked to come back at 30%. Council has asked us to come back at 60%, but I think that that's just for just an update, because at that point in time, there's really nothing, there's no changes we can do, there's nothing that we can turn around. And I'd be happy to come to this board if they would like to give them an update at that time as well. So I think we'll be a success. I think that there are areas that we still have to deal with, like the intersection of Great Falls and Lincoln. There's a lot of traffic engineers out there that feel like they've got the best solution, and we just got to get the data to prove them all right, So that's kind of where we're headed with that. So we'll that's the area around the park is the hardest part right now. The area east of Great Falls is pretty much under control. And we just have the other side to deal with now. So I think that was it. I'm not going to talk you all to death because I could. Oh, it was it. How about that? So please let me, and I apologize for me losing my breath. I was scared that was going to happen, and I'm sorry for that. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dove. That was great. Very informative, and I think you probably could have used some pictures today, given the rain we've had over the last 2 days.
I thought I had them in here.
Taking pictures of some of the flooding that's going on
Oh,
this
yeah.
week.
I had some pictures of the plan too, but for some reason they're not in there. Okay, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad you stopped here. I think that generally this is, I really applaud the city for taking this approach and connecting up all these issues. As you mentioned, it's a stormwater project, but it has all these other things that it's connected to. And so I think it's very smart to do all this together. I know you're trying to balance lots of different requests from the community and elsewhere. So, but I think this is great stuff. So what's before us is a work session item. We are requested to provide comments and thoughts, suggestions, but there's no action for the commission tonight or elsewhere.
No, there's no action before you all. This is something that you had requested to be briefed on the project, and obviously you all have a lot to do with funding for this project. Since the CIP comes through you all as the first stop, you all recently made your recommendation on that funding program to council, and of course urban design and the design of streets and parks generally. So this is a good body to weigh in and provide comment on the design of the project. But it isn't before you as an official action. Of course, the design of streets is ultimately sort of by charter falls to the city manager and the city engineer.
Understood. I do appreciate the fact that it's before us, and I think commissioners will have some good comments. So let me turn it over to my fellow commissioners. Who wants to kick it off with some questions, comments, thoughts on the project? Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I used to live at Oak, and Lincoln. So, you'd come into the city from Arlington where the speed limit is 30, and you get onto Lincoln Avenue, and it's a nice wide street, and so unless you're really paying attention, you're going to probably continue to go at least 30 because that's basically how you feel like it's designed. Subconsciously, at least, anyway. I'm just wondering, since you're doing all the roadbed work and all of that, what is the width of the street, and have you looked at maybe adjusting the width to account for traffic calming capability?
Yes, we have. At areas where there will be parking and two-lane traffic, we're looking at 11-foot lanes, each of the lanes, and 8-foot parking if you include the gutter. So that would be the total width of roadway minus of course, the curbing. I mean, the gutter line itself, which would be another 6 inches or 12 inches. And we are narrowing that down to just 22 feet or 11 feet each lane at intersections, so that the bump outs will occur at intersections that put pedestrians in full view and also narrow the road at those locations.
Have you considered 10 feet?
There has been discussion of 10 feet. I think once you get to 10 feet, you have to look at some other issues. I know that may be where the yellow line goes away as well. I don't think we were ready to do that, mainly just to keep our snowplows happy.
Think about snow plows. It seems like, if we have, let's say, 11-foot plow, can you buy a 10-foot plow?
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just say I'll add on to that.
Introduce yourself, Greg. Just introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Zach Bradley, Public Works Director. I'll add on to what Mr. Dudley had said in regards to lane widths. We are looking at the potential for depending on how you want to look at it, it could be an 11-foot travel lane, 7-foot parking lane, or a 10-foot travel lane, an 8-foot parking lane, to sneak an extra foot out of that. Some of the issues we get to with the plows, right? A 10-foot plow doesn't actually take a 10-foot swipe of snow off a road. Once you angle it in, you end up at like 8.5 feet. So it doubles our efforts, right? We have to run smaller trucks, so we only have half as much salt. We've got to make 4 passes on a road instead of 2 passes on a road. Drastically changes the manpower needed for snow. But that said, we have not necessarily finalized that, so there is another foot that we are looking at in there to sort out.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that there's a lot of balls in the air to, come up with the right solution overall. But given that there's been a lot of work done recently around the country on looking at traffic engineering and not designing roads the way they were in the past to kind of make it think like it's okay to go faster, but to really send that signal to drivers to be aware that the road's narrower, you should be going slower. As an alternative to having police out there to try to enforce it all the time. So that would be my only input. I mean, there's so many things about this that I like that I particularly like all the pocket BMPs and encourage you to go ahead with all of those. But on the lane width, since you are doing pretty significant roadbed reconstruction and so forth, it seems like it wouldn't really add to the cost. So just ask that you consider a 10-foot lane and the capability of a 10-foot lane to help with the traffic calming and pedestrian safety. Outside of that, it looks good.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Anybody else?
I can go. Yeah, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Stevens, that there's a lot to like about this project. I'm really glad to hear that it's been so collaborative with the neighborhood. It's nice to see the city being responsive to residents. I think this will bring multiple benefits: stormwater, sidewalks, traffic calming. One thing that I think we just should be conscious of, though, is that, we are making public investments on a street, and this is something that the residents have kind of asked for. And I don't know, I just want to make sure that we're all thinking about that, that there are some organized residents that are interested in improving their street. And I think there are, efficient, things that the city wants to do in terms of stormwater, and the roadbed needs to be reconstructed, so let's do it well the first time. But I think when it comes to like additional investments, I think we just need to be conscious of the way that we're spending the city funds that we have. So it's just one little thing that's been bothering me. I don't, I'm always interested in fairness. I don't want to be like a community where it's sort of like the squeaky wheel gets the grease or the fancy street, So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that as we're making these investments. So speaking of that, what is the investment that would be required for the rest of the project as you sort of envision it beyond the grants that we have so far? So we have about $7.5 million in grant funding. And so what is left that the city would need to provide?
Yep. We have about $6.5 million grant funding.
It's 4.8 stormwater, 2.7 roadbed.
Yeah.
So it's 7.5.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Long day.
I just did the math. I was just checking my math.
I've been dealing with spreadsheets all day. I got
Yeah.
they're dancing through my head like sugar plums, I guess, at this point. Yeah, so 7.5 is what we have available. I can't tell you what the rest of that would be. We've done some rough estimations on like what the crosswalks would be. I mean, they're not overly expensive to put in, but I'd say that if everybody got their wish, we'd probably need another $1 million maybe. Because, there's some things that we're skirting too that we have to, kind of pay attention to, which is, we can't push our stormwater grant too far, right? Mm-hmm. We can't go in and put, I'm exaggerating, but we can't go in and put, 10-foot sidewalks where only a 4-foot one existed before, right? Or we can't, you just can't do that kind of thing, right? And so even the fact that we're looking at wider sidewalks should probably call for additional local funding to cover those additional pieces. Because I think 5 foot without any obstacles is kind of what we were gearing for. But again, there had been calls from council asking for 6 foot project wide. So we have to evaluate those things.
Yeah, and I think from a public investment standpoint too, $1 million, I know that's a ballpark figure, but that's a lot of money, Our NTC projects are typically, this feels to me almost like an NTC project on steroids in a way. And I think there's so much great stuff that's going to come out of this. And I think if we do it well, this will be a model for, like what these kinds of investments in a street can yield to the people who live on that street, but also the people who use that street. Mm-hmm. So I think it, if all goes well, it'll be a really great example of like, what these BMPs look like and how they operate and how they can improve, the flooding in a localized area and just the feel of the street. So I'm like super jazzed about that. I just want to make sure that when it comes to our council making decisions about how we're spending taxpayer dollars, that we're thinking about, equity and there are many streets, I think, that would benefit from these kinds of investments. And so we do have a willing community here, mostly willing maybe on Lincoln Avenue, but I just want us to be mindful of that, I think is all I'm saying. For reference, if we're at $7.5 million of funding, like the Park Avenue Great Streets project is 11.5. So this is about 2/3 of the value of that project, which there's been a ton of community discussion about it. So this is a big project, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. And it may need to be even bigger to get all the things that the residents want and maybe that the community wants for this particular street. So just something that we should think about carefully. I did have a couple other questions. One is reducing the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. So we just did the 20 is plenty, and Lincoln along with West, and I have the map here, West, Lincoln, Great Falls Park, which always surprised me, Maple, Roosevelt, and Hillwood were all left at 25. Mm-hmm. So, but we're changing our mind on Lincoln. Are we changing our mind? Why are we changing our mind on Lincoln at this point rather than choosing it earlier?
So the intention was to never not drop the speed limits on the streets with double yellows. It was a engineering acknowledgement that simply changing a sign was not going to change driver behavior. So with the Lincoln Ave project, we're able to do narrower lanes. We're
Okay.
able to do other stuff that encourages those slower speed limits. We get better driver compliance.
So now we feel like, okay.
So this is not a changing of the mind, this is the next step. All of those other streets you mentioned, as they are due for a CIP project, would undergo a redesign of sorts to support a 20-mile-an-hour speed
Yes,
limit.
that makes sense to me. Okay, thank you. And then the last question I have is the proposed vault under Lincoln. That park is actually pretty new. I mean, when my kids were little, we took them there, and actually before they redid that park, it was even way worse in terms of the flooding. It was unusable. Now at least it's raised, so even though you have to kind of wade through to the playground, like you can use the playground, your kids can use the playground, even when like the whole thing is a lake all around you, it's usable. So if you were to do that, like, would the play structure be impacted, or would the park be not usable for a period of time, or what would that look like?
Right now, what I envision is that the play structures wouldn't be moved. However, if there was a benefit to moving them and, and encroaching further on the park, then we could look at that and see, how much that costs. From what I understand, that play equipment there is fairly heavy. But I did ask, just in case, just to see what the scenario was, I asked Park and Rec to see how much it would literally cost for the makers of it to move it and store it until we were done, and then we would bring it back.
Okay.
So that would be what we would be talking about. But I also don't want, there are trees in the park that I don't want to mess with. There are some bushes and things like that, we could put them back same way we found them, but especially along that side there side of Great Falls, put in something big enough where we wouldn't have to encroach that far in, so.
All right. Okay, well, thank you. I think
Thank
it's a really exciting project. I'm, thrilled to see these investments in a street, and I think it'll be a really excellent result in the end. Thank you for your hard work.
Who's next?
Sure, I'll go next. We'll go down the line. No, it's a great project. I'm very excited about it. I live just outside the project limits. I'm on the 1000 block of Lincoln, so I'm just outside the limits. But, one thing I would say, you mentioned, the history, and I've only lived in the neighborhood for about 14 years, but the last go-around, I think maybe neighbors have changed because, when they say I don't know if there was ever a vote, but I think people on that street lobbied hard to the council at the time because of the fear about losing parking. And and I was following that pretty closely when that was happening about 10 years ago, a little more. Mr. Duncan may remember that. I'm sure he does. I think it was people really, in some ways almost irrationally, like we're protective of their parking spots on Lincoln, and my recollection was that's what killed it. So I think people, maybe attitudes have changed, maybe some neighbors have changed, but for whatever the reason is, it's very exciting to see that, they're more receptive to that. Because, one thing also to keep in mind on these kind of projects, and I certainly appreciate when you talk about knocking on doors, you have to work with people who are the most affected, but, obviously we never want to lose sight that, as you said, the folks don't own the street in front of their house. We want to work with neighbors, but we don't want to do stuff that, kind of even what Commissioner Comont just said, sort of favors like a parochial interest of a neighbor over, the greater good, because so many people use that street. We're not talking about, a little dead-end cul-de-sac. Lincoln, in our little small city, we only have so many, sort of through streets like that, have, multiple modes using it. And so Lincoln is one of those streets. And so obviously you mentioned the pedestrian side, and I think you showed ever since I've lived in town, and these guys hear me talk about it all the time, there's if you go back in your slideshow, you have the pole that's like one of the most annoying poles to me in the whole city, because you have it from the other side. If you want to actually make it look worse, take the top right picture, take the picture from the other way. There's a huge Verizon equipment cabinet that's attached to that pole, and then there's the speed limit sign, so when my kids were little and my wife was pushing my daughter and a baby, you can't fit a stroller through there. You can't, it's one of the worst like obstructions I've ever seen. You know, it's like someone on a wheelchair couldn't get through. I mean, even a normal person has to like go sideways and walk around it. So the fact that you're fixing that is so exciting just for that alone, you know.
I don't know, I think I got a win, I think I have one that beats it down in the 600 block. There's a part where the concrete, because I'm not going to call it a sidewalk, the concrete is on an angle like this, and the pole is in the middle of it.
Right, we have some, I mean,
So-
yeah, and like, so when I'm very honest, when I moved to town, like, and I started walking a lot on this area, I was like, how did this even happen? How do we have all these poles in the middle of the sidewalk? So this is really exciting for that, you know, even just for that. Obviously, it's way more than just that, but, so it's a really exciting project. I went through, you know, as far as like some technical questions, I did go through like the sheets, you know. I had a question. I saw, you know, down towards that western end, it seemed like you had pulled out that section as like maybe not part of this phase, like some issues with available right of way and need for easements. It was kind of called out like the final, I don't know how many 100 feet or so, several hundred feet,
Yeah.
heading towards west.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that corner is obviously problematic.
Right.
Also, it's narrow. So what's going on with that section?
We have not come to a conclusion there yet.
I don't know if you have that. You said you had the
I don't have
Oh,
that
the-
particular picture.
No, I meant like just like the individual
Oh, do you have
sections.
those, the plan views there? Thank you.
Is it on the
Yes, yes. Yes, they are.
And it's not crucial, but I mean, you know, that you had it split out, and then you had like a concept for it.
Aha, I made it to the top of the list. Did y'all see that? It was at the top of the list, the Google list.
Ah,
All right, down there. I know, it's the little things, guys. It's the little things. Go PDF, exhibit, yeah, that's fine. One of the two. No, that's the presentation. You went to other thing.
yeah. Well, I mean, while he's doing that too, because there's also stormwater implications
Yeah,
in that
go up.
area as well. I know there's a neighbor. You probably talked to the guy. I don't know him that well, but he got heavily flooded
Oh, yeah.
in the
That's it.
2019 storm. And if you ever walk by his house, he built like a dike, like in his
Oh, yeah.
driveway, and like a flood thing. And he like, you know, he's pretty. I'm sure he probably, you know, talked to you for like a long time when you knocked on his door.
Yeah, I've been in touch with that guy.
I was hoping, like, you know, that his area would be fixed, you know, as part of.
That's
at
what we're
least
looking to
improved.
do.
Or if I was concerned, maybe he was outside of the area that was, you know,
No,
where we had the right of way.
That's where we start the project. I should have brought these up earlier, I'm sorry, but there on the bottom to the left is where, it's kind of what we've got configured now for that area. There's supposed to be an intersection improvement over here as well, so there's some mixing and matching that has to take place for that as some time goes.
Right, so yes, you say potential future phase.
Right.
Right, due to anticipated easement. So you mean we need like to take an easement on the, you know, into those front yards? In order to make that happen?
Yes.
And where does that end? So like, I think the guy with the bad flooding is like,
Oh, the guy with the flooding is right here.
he's like maybe four houses down or something.
About right. I think he's right here.
Okay, yeah, and his driveway obviously is you know, it's in the basement, and he built like a dike. I've never seen something like that, exactly what this guy built. I don't know if it works or not, but, so, because and that's a low spot. I mean, you know, the 2019 storm, I mean, if you were here at the time, like a lot of us were, it exposed, you know, I think a lot of people got a quick lesson in like, you know, that we think we live in a kind of a relatively flat place, but every little depression filled up like a bathtub, and he happens to live in a low spot.
Right, right. No,
you know,
and we were able to pick that up actually
Yeah.
on our LiDAR, so
Right.
we kind of saw it.
And so are there some BMPs and some storage proposed in that area, or no? What are you doing?
Not in this area. In this area, the name of the game is going to be redirection of flow.
Because that goes back to the trail also. I think that the grade wants to take it south.
Yeah, the grade there wants to take it that way. We have a pipe that's in front of, probably right where that Lincoln Avenue. Right where Lincoln Avenue is. There's a drain there. It actually comes up to the street over here. Comes in, you can see that blue line there.
Yeah.
Coming into the street. the situation is there's no drains up top there
Right.
on Northwest. So that water comes down that curb line.
Yep.
And if it gets big enough, deep enough, it'll make that turn and come down into this area, which is lower.
Right.
And then find its way to this guy's driveway, which is lowest. And then he also gets hit from this side too. So we're
Yes.
gonna make that water up there through a raised crosswalk, just go straight across the street and on down to where it eventually goes anyway.
Okay.
We'll do some DMPs down this way to slow it capture the water. So we're not gonna do any kind of major.
Okay, but just redirecting, yeah, that in and of itself, I think will help significantally. So that's good to hear. So, okay, so it's only like the final like 2 or 3 frontages there that will have to wait. But no, otherwise, I mean, like I said, it's really exciting to see it happen because, like I said, there was, like in fits and starts, there was an idea to improve at least the pedestrian environment on Lincoln, and, parking is what killed it, so I'm glad that, and I'm sure you're still going to hear a lot about that. I mean, it's an older neighborhood, people have, I guess, less off-street parking maybe than in other areas, but I still think, it's important to remember that it's not just for that purpose only. The street
Right.
is so much more than that.
Well, the people in that area, believe it or not, especially the guy with the issue there, take as much parking as you want to in order to get my stuff straight.
Yeah.
But if you zoom up to the top there, Jack, you'll see kind of a comparison to where the parking is now, what we consider it to be, and then below that is where the new parking is. So if you
And as far as utilization, honestly, the north side of the street always has tons of parking. I mean, there's more density on the southern side, so that tends to be more well-used. So if you take some, there'll be plenty of spots on the north side. Maybe someone has to park across the street one night, I don't know. But yes, I wouldn't let that be an impediment to good design,
Right.
for the overall vision of the project. I'd hate to see as we said, squeaky wheel, kind of
I mean, at the end of the day, this is a you can't say no to it project. I mean, it doesn't have to go through any approvals or votes or anything like that. It's just a straightforward, factual engineering component. The sidewalks have to get bigger. They're not big enough. They have to be bigger, point blank. Even if I go home and I say, to heck with the bump outs and the this and the that and the other, there's still going to be a sidewalk that goes down that street.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that now in this public setting. I've said it in another public setting as well. This isn't a project you can say no to. It's going to happen. We're going to work with you because it's easier to get honey, flies with honey than it is with salt. So that's kind of the realm I'm working in anyway.
Well, I mean, that's a good idea. I think you have the perfect, approach there because I think that's what you need in this kind of a project. But like I said, I'm just very enthusiastic about it, and I'm really heartened to see the change, in attitudes just in that time because it was 10 years ago was a very different, reception to even touching anything here. So anyhow, yeah, no, it's great. And, the multifaceted approach is great, and hopefully it can serve as a model. Lincoln is it gets a lot of through traffic, and so this will slow that down. A lot of people do use it, to go back and forth from Arlington and the metro, and and this will be great. One other little pet, request, if at all possible. There used to be a sign, like when people get to that light, this is not related to, this is traffic, but like there used to be, when people got heading westbound on Lincoln, get to West. For years, there was a traffic directional sign telling people that 7 and Broad Street, it requires you to make a left at that intersection. And one day that sign went away, and then it results in a lot of people who are looking to get to Broad Street go, because they're not sure if they should go left or go straight and stay on Lincoln. Obviously, 95% of people want to go left and get to Broad Street, and they don't realize how to do that. So if you could put that sign back, or I don't know, do something so that it's clear. Because, what happens is I live on the next block, and we get every day we get some number of cars that miss that turn and then have to go a block in and then make a K turn and come out. Because there used to be that sign for years, and then it went away, so.
Yeah, we can certainly look into that,
Yeah,
for
just
sure.
to
And just to
work in
warn
my
you
way.
guys, there's another Lincoln Avenue project going on as well. It's called Upper Lincoln Avenue. It's the little-known
That's the
brother
stormwater one.
of
That's the stormwater one?
This
Yeah.
one, yes.
Yeah.
It's been under works for quite some time, much longer than this one, and we're actually in the bid phase on that now. That'll be the next project, stormwater project, to go live into construction, probably near the end of this year, so.
Great, thank you.
I'll go. Thank you. So everybody ahead of me has brought us some very great points, and I think there is a lot to like about this project for sure. And I don't need to re-echo everybody's comments because I agree with most of them. But I do have some questions just quickly about the BMPs and the landscaping that is going to be proposed for those, and then who maintains the landscaping there.
Okay, so there will be landscaping proposed from there. I can't tell you exactly what, I have to have the manual out in front of me to see what vegetation works best where. And the city will have to manage it. There may be some open space that comes available near people's property that it can be should be managed by the person that it is front of it, or they can do what they want to. Just as long as it remains unpaved, I don't care what they do with it. But for the BMPs, yes, those would be the city's responsibility. And it's nothing, I mean, it's not new to us. I mean, we have BMPs around now that we have on a yearly or bi-yearly maintenance schedule, so these would be no different.
Okay, no, I just wanted to make sure that there is a plan. Unfortunately, I didn't see these drawings, so I'll go through this set of drawings now that I didn't go beyond the links in the agenda, just time permitting. But that would be great, just so that it doesn't become like weed factories that are like waist high. That's all I was concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so many allusions have been made to, Mr. Duncan was around the first time that this was tried. I will not belabor except to say, I will belabor it, obviously. Yeah, I mean, that was tough. That was a tough battle. Last time we tried to do anything on this general area. I mean, it was a fight on three fronts. First, don't take my parking spot. Second, don't take my retaining wall. Third, don't take the bushes behind my retaining wall. By the time we got to the front yards, the enthusiasm for the project just had expired, basically. And so I want to thank you for being the tip of the spear and taking this information and this reality to people at their doors, because that's what's required. And that's the only contribution I'd like to make tonight to the dialogue, which is this morning at the mayor's planning meeting. I listened in. There was a lot of discussion about the bicycle projects, bicycle friendly, they don't call it the greening of South and Northwest Street, but it's essentially something like that. And there's a lot of anxiety that there hasn't been enough, public input. Do people know what's going on? What are we going to show them? Have we gone out door to door? Should we walk in the neighborhood? All the things that you raised are at play in that. And so I would suggest that we learn from what your experience has been in this project, and as we go along, continue to learn to try to meet people where they are. And I think there's just no substitute for a one-on-one conversation with people at their door, where, as you say, you find out things you might not have expected, which is, I'll give up parking space if it means that my basement doesn't flood. People are intelligent and they see their own best interests. And sometimes those coincide with the community's interests. Hopefully, most of the time they do. But, I guess as a planning commission, I would like to see us anticipate that this is going to get to be a bigger project than you envision now, because there will be pressure from people who want wider sidewalks. Momentum for that kind of thinking is there now, and it was not there 15 years ago. So when it comes to allocation of resources, I would say that the Planning Commission might do well to keep ready with the argument that, let's do it once and let's do it right, and let's spend the money that needs to get spent to do it right, so that we don't, 15 years from now, find folks sitting up here saying, gee, back in 15 or whatever, 2024, you know, the previous times we tried to do this, we didn't quite hit the ball. Which leads me to the last question. What's the span of time in terms of I live on Southwest Street, and remember when, you know, we went down to the ground when we repaved Southwest Street. We just closed the street. It was just easier to close the street. And it was a successful project, I think. It took a little time, but everybody adjusted to it. What's from the beginning of you getting approval, you know, we're past 30, we're past 60, we're at 100%, we're ready to go.
Right.
How long
Well,
do we
I can tell you
anticipate
that,
it'll take?
I can tell you that the schedule has this project going to construction in July of 2025. We allow a year for it to occur. We'll probably do it by block, essentially, just allowing local traffic only to certain areas of the block. As with all of our projects, we maintain access and ingress and egress to property owners while during the day or at night or what have you. Our inspectors work real close with property owners while we're out there, just letting them know what's going on. So that's kind of the time frame. And I have to say that you're right, there have been forces to come to bear as far as the project is concerned. And, you know, I think we made a deal kind of with the bikes, for example, in that there are no bike lanes in this or part of this project except for one striped area right at the very beginning on the very east portion of the project until it gets to from the city-county line to the point it gets to Yucatan. After that, it's share the road 100% because of the lower speed limits. We feel safe, confident doing that, and other little things about the road say that if you know that you can ride on this road safely after what we're doing. So there were some there were a lot of people that said, hey, we want bicycle lanes in this, and you guys have heard from the bicycle lanes as much as anybody else, but they were pretty forthcoming and understood what we were doing, and we're good to go. So I think we'll face all of our challenges the same way we faced that one.
Okay. One last follow-on. Could you go to the screen, I think it was 18, that shows the cross-section of, sidewalk,
It's in
parking,
the
lane,
oh yeah, that was
cross-section, because that is the sister or sibling of what you see in the bike master plan discussion.
That
about,
kind of thing?
Yeah, that one. So that's what you're talking about. If you're showing something to somebody, that's what you're showing them. You're showing them a parking lane, parking lane, and a sidewalk of at least 5 feet, maybe, if not more, on each side of the street. Is that basically where we're going?
Yep.
Because that is one of the options in the bicycle master plan for some of the major streets that we're looking at to put bicycles on. And there are other options too. And what you're saying is that you've looked at things and talked with people, and this in your opinion, professional opinion, is the best way to accommodate all mobility modes.
Yeah, if we would have included bike lanes in this project, it would have been so far up into people's yard. We would have had to buy right of way. With this project, we don't plan on buying any right of way. Everything we're doing is in the right of way already. Right, so we don't plan on buying any right of way or doing anything like that. I'll be honest with you. I said, you want to get signs in the yards that say no to Green and Lincoln. You try putting bike lanes that far up into people's yard, and so I think that was understood. I mean, because we looked at that because we knew we had to, right? Because somebody was going to ask, so we knew we had to. So
good. I would again close by saying the lessons that you've learned are very instructive as we do the bike master plan. And the streets are different, widths are different. I understand that that some things may work in some places that don't work in others, but just as a general philosophy, this project is going to set some kind of precedent, I think, for, the new look in Falls Church.
Well, in ways it already has. This was one of the first projects that we did a watershed ride approach. This started our process of looking at watersheds on a holistic standpoint and not just focusing on the area with the problem. So we did this for this project. We did it for all of Trips Run. We've done it for all of the Trips Run watershed. And this is the way we'll do all of our projects from now on.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me in the war stories.
Thank you for sharing. And thank you, Mr. Dudley, for the presentation and for bringing this to us. There's no formal action was said tonight, but we really appreciate the opportunity to comment on this and for your promise to come back at 60% design. Is that what you
Yeah, I
said?
can do that. I can do that.
And, I also appreciate the extensive community outreach you've done. It's not an easy job to do. You know that. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, so thank you for all of that.
Yeah, I've gotten
You should
some
also
really
be-
heartbreaking emails in the past couple of weeks. I go, what in the world am I going to do with this? So.
Yeah, it's not easy to do, we know that. But I think Mr. Duncan is right that this does seem to have precedent for other parts of the city. I know folks on my street want to know how can they get some of this done on their street. So, that's
What do you
a good
do?
problem to have, right? People are starting to think differently about the infrastructure, and it addresses a lot of things that we talked about up here as a commission. We so rarely have the chance to re-engineer the mistakes of the past, and we talk a lot about transportation infrastructure as impeding a lot of the public policy goals we want to achieve in this city. And so it is a big project, but I do think it's particularly consequential, not just for this corridor, but for the whole city, as was mentioned. So I do think there's an opportunity to do things different here. I would support wider sidewalks. Again, we rarely have a chance to do that. We need to do that in this area for all the reasons you mentioned, whether it's 6 feet or not. I think that makes a lot of sense. I would also support shrinking the travel lanes, understanding that there's pressures from DPW and other places on that. But again, we so rarely have a chance to do things different. I would love to see us push the envelope as far as we can here with this project to correct some of those mistakes in the past. But again, great stuff. I don't think there's anything else from the commission on this, but thank you again for bringing this to us.
Let me just give one shout out to our project that's going into construction right as we speak, which is what we call the Hillwood Number 1 project, happening at the corner of Hillwood and Brook Lane in Falls Church. Very exciting project. Work will get started. It was one of the original Stormwater Advisory Board projects, and we are getting that one completed as well. So I just want to give that one a short shout out. Thank you, guys. Have a great evening.
Good luck dealing with the stormwater this week. Okay, great. Moving on to the next work session item, highly related to the last conversation. Item 7B on the floodplain ordinance updates. Mr. Stoddard.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm happy to introduce this one before I turn it over to Jeff Rubin, who's the lead staffer on this, as well as the city's floodplain manager. So the item before you, as described in your staff report, is TO 2402. The item mentioned above that, TR 2413, is what council acted on and passed at their recent meeting on March 11th. So that was the formal process of kicking off a zoning ordinance amendment to revise both the city's floodplain maps, which of course is a map amendment, as well as the text of the floodplain ordinance itself, which is a text amendment. And both the map amendment and text amendment are what's included in TO 2402. There is a tight timeline for getting this done so that the city can maintain its standing in the National Flood Insurance Program. So when the council did refer this to you, they did put it on a tight schedule. As I said, they referred it out to you on March 11th. It's before you tonight for your first work session on April 3rd. It's scheduled for you all to take up as a public hearing item and make your recommendation back to council at your next regular meeting, which is April 17th. Council did set a deadline for you to deliver your recommendation back no later than April 19th. And then council is scheduled to take up final consideration of the item on April 29th. So I appreciate that it is a quick timeline. Of course, the severity of falling out of the National Flood Insurance Program is what's motivating that timeline. And of course, Mr. Rubin has done a great job of getting this ready and getting it through council's first reading and then in front of you tonight for a work session. But with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to walk you through it.
Great. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Jeff Rubin, as was mentioned. I'm the city's GIS manager and floodplain manager, wearing my floodplain manager hat this evening. That gave a nice warm, thank you very much, Mr. Stoddard. FEMA is in charge of the National Floodplain Insurance Program, NFIP, and the NFIP provides flood insurance to residents, homeowners, and others across the country. One of the benefits is, or one of the requirements of this program is that any individual that has a federally backed mortgage and is in the floodplain must have flood insurance. It's compulsory. So if we fall out of the NFIP, if we are not found to be not compliant as a jurisdiction, some of those mortgages can be called to pay in full. That it's kind of a, he was saying that this is his project was like, you can't say no, this is also that kind of thing, is what I'm trying to say very clearly. Insurance rate calculations on FEMA's side changed about 2 years ago. They have something called Risk Rating 2.0. I'll get into why that matters in a little bit, but it's based on specific features and proximity to the floodplain, specific features of the property and specific, the proximity to the floodplain, and has provided lower insurance rates by and large for our residents. The firm or flood insurance rate map that we currently have, the effective one right now, was made effective in 2004. They are providing an update to that will become effective June 6th, hence the tight timeline. When a new firm is provided by FEMA, they do a review of the respective jurisdiction's floodplain ordinance. Ours was found, upon our own review, found to would not be approved if it were to go through that process now. So that's why the floodplain ordinance is also being updated. We are taking this opportunity to add in a few extra things that I'll go over in a minute. But back to the new firm, just giving an idea of parcel differences, because the dimensions of the floodplain are going to change. In the 1% floodplain, the net change is 2 extra parcels will be in the floodplain and 4 structures. But along Trips Run, 11 are coming out, 2 are going in, no structure change. Along 4 Mile Run, 11 parcels are going in, plus the 4 structures I mentioned, 2 commercial, 2 residential. But in general, the floodway and 1% flood area are reducing by about an acre across the city. So then there's something called the Community Rating System, the CRS program, that we participate in. CRS provides points for communities that adopt higher regulatory standards related to flooding. The points add up to class ratings. We're currently class 7, which equates to a I'm not exactly going in order of the staff report, but it equates to a 15% discount for all flood insurance premiums in the city. The proposed ordinance that we have provided for you will get us to a class 6, which is a 20% discount, and maybe, we're not sure, maybe a class 5, which is a 25% discount. We have not been a class 5 before. That would be the best class, and I think would be equal for the best class in the state. The city's current ordinance contains some conflicting and vague language that we have removed just for clarity and to meet the new standards. And in addition to that, we are adding 5 higher regulatory standards, or we're recommending 5 regulatory standards. An increase of 6 inches to our freeboard requirement, just as a primer. Freeboard is area of or height above the floodplain or base flood elevation. So right now it's 12 inches. We're recommending an extra 6 to 18 inches because, as I mentioned before, risk rating 2.0 is the new calculation for insurance rates, rounds up to the nearest foot. So right now, residents are getting credit for 12 inches. If they go to 18, they'll get credit for 24. So it's a biggest bang for your buck situation. Another biggest bang for your buck situation is the 1% reduction to the substantial improvement threshold. That's the currently 50% threshold for any improvement that costs 50% or more of a property that's in the floodplain the property needs to be completely brought up to code. We're reducing that to 49% instead of the 50% because we get some CRS credit for any improvement below 50. It's not per improvement. So we would get the same amount of improvement or same amount of credit if we went to 10%. So 49 is the least pain for the same benefit. We're also introducing a 5-year rolling assessment for substantial improvements. So instead of right now it'd be about a 1-year snapshot for that substantial improvement calculation, it'd be a 5-year rolling amount for that. So if someone has a $200,000 house, for instance, or $200,000 improvement of the property, they could do 60,000 1 year of improvement and then 60,000 2 years later currently, and they would not have to bring the entire building or structure up to code. With this, they would have to. Just it ensures that we're not we're disincentivizing people for putting money into properties that are flood prone, essentially. There's a non-conversion agreement for spaces that aren't suitable for habitation. This is going to be like garages and outbuildings, those kinds of things, like, a shed in the back, whatnot. This is mainly for when the property changes hands. Sometimes people want to make it like a grandma, the garage, make it like grandma's, what do you call that? In-law suite. And this will go with the deed, so they will know very clearly they cannot do that. And finally, a more detailed regulation of fences in the floodway, just so that we promote the health of the floodway as much as possible. The timeline was shown to you before. The 17th is when you'll be seeing me again and hopefully pass on a recommendation to council. And then the 29th, the council will have their second reading, final adoption, and signing. With that, please, any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll tell you, when I read through the materials, I found it very complicated and kind of tough to understand, but I appreciated
I can understand that.
your remarks here. It's much clearer, answered a bunch of my questions. Let me just say one thing I was looking for going through the materials was a map or something that kind of was really clear about where. Pardon?
Jack, do you have the map? The firm.
There was a map of the city. Right. Just trying to understand where specifically geographically this is applied.
So the flood insurance rate map, this is what is provided by FEMA. You see the blue and on the right-hand side. Yeah, right there.
Oh,
So that's going to be the upper Trips Run. And then if you go to the next page, it'll show the rest of Trips Run and 4 Mile Run.
Gotcha. And how is that? You said you went through some numbers. How is that different from?
I can do that again.
The existing ones?
So Trips Run, 11 parcels are coming out, 2 other parcels are going in, but no actual structures are changing. Because the distinction, I think, is pretty important. For 4 Mile Run, 11 parcels are going in, and within those 4 structures are going to be in the floodplain, 2 commercial, 2 residential.
Got it. Okay. I told you I thought it was confusing. Now, gotcha. Now I understand.
Got it.
It's very clear. Any other questions or comments, reactions from commissioners on this? Mr. Krasner.
I had a couple questions. Well, actually, kind of two areas I had some questions about. Well, one, you referenced, actually, you already kind of answered my first question about the map, the updated maps and what the changes were. I mean, I'm sure, I assume the city participated in that project because normally, right, it's like a kind of the issue with the draft maps and we comment and it takes, I know in Fairfax County, it took like a couple of years. And council at some point has to approve the new maps, I believe, right? Was there any were there any changes to the draft that staff recommended to FEMA? Do we accept their changes? Was there any back and forth on that?
I can make, I mean, unless, yeah. We did not have any recommended changes. Fairfax County is pushing back on quite a few of their calculations, and I think we're expecting some maybe changes based on that, but we accept it as is because the changes were not necessarily.
And you said two parcels were added or taken out? I just forgot what you said. You mentioned it.
Net, 2 parcels are added and 4 structures are added within the 1% floodplain. And in the floodway, 3 parcels are added and 2 structures are being removed.
Okay.
So that's a total of 5 parcels in and 2 structures in
They're
net.
They may be in the maps. I'm sure you have maps that show what where
I'm
those
also
are.
the GIS manager, so I have maps.
Yes, I'm sure you have the maps that show which ones those are. It may be interesting for some.
It's the mailer went out actually, and you may see a bunch of yellow signs around the city that myself and some colleagues put out in the last day or two.
Yeah.
Those designate the parcels that are moving out or moving in specifically.
For the hearing, this is the work session, right? And this is coming
Yes.
back. It'd be great if you could maybe include that in our attachments.
Yeah.
So we can see.
It
the
wasn't
changes.
created at the time that I submitted this,
Yeah.
but it will be.
Okay,
For the next
that's
one.
great. My other question is more, it has to do with the way this is structured, like the whole large section here that, provides the BZA, our Board of Zoning Appeals, as the body to decide on variances. And you're using that term, but variances, it doesn't have to be a variance, but variances from some of these sections. I wonder if the BZA, and I love BZAs, I spend a lot of time with BZAs, but I wonder if the BZA is really the best body to be hearing those kind of cases. Other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, and I know Fairfax because that's where I spend, my days, spend my nights here. But in Fairfax, for example, it's the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, the governing body that, hears any type of exceptions from the floodplain ordinance. For building in a floodplain, if there's obviously certain things can be done by right, but if there are things that you want to do in a floodplain, it's not the BZA. And the only reason I say that is that, again, just the expertise that's involved, and I'm sure, in a BZA, we don't have as many as a large county would have, but, the expertise that it's necessary, the environmental lens that you need to look at when you're, considering relief from these types of sections. I just find, and also some of the language in there, is also just, I think I don't know, the city attorney, I'm sure will review it, but they should certainly dovetail with again, I know there's reference in here, and I didn't mark this up, and I could do that maybe between now and next week, but there's certain language in the draft. So I know some of it you just took from the original and it's reprinted, but it just was kind of problematic to me as far as the way it refers to a BZA, just the way BZAs exist in state by state code. But I just wonder, so that's a long sort of background, but was there, and maybe the answer is no, was there ever any thought given to changing that? I don't know how long it's been that way, but was there ever any thought to maybe changing that? There's no reason the BZA it needs to be the body that hears these things. Are they really the best suited to hear it?
Well, to answer your question directly, with your permission, no. It wasn't considered. That specifically is because So I worked with the Department of Recreation and Conservation, DCR, for the state of Virginia, and they are sort of our backup when we do these kinds of activities to work, with FEMA and whatnot. They have a state template or, a state default floodplain ordinance. We actually scrapped ours entirely, used theirs. So there was nothing that was copied and pasted necessarily. So that's coming from their their model.
Model ordinance.
It's my understanding, and this is somewhat new to me, so Paul, if you have any input or whatnot, but my thought was our floodplain ordinance is situated in the zoning ordinance. I don't believe that's the same for Fairfax. I think it is separate. It is in its own place.
It lives in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, so it does live in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Chess Bay ordinance is kind of separate.
Excuse me?
It lives in the zoning ordinance. It does. Yeah, it's in the zoning ordinance.
Then I don't know much more.
So I guess all I would say is that, there's no, put it this way, there's no state requirement that the BZA needs to be, any exceptions to that has to go to the BZA. And so it might be something that's worth thinking about, and maybe that's a discussion for staff. That maybe, and again, I don't know how many of these we see. It might be interesting to know how many, because it's been like that in our previous ordinance. I don't know if there's a record of how often the BZA had to hear specifically a request for some type of relief from the floodplain ordinance. It'd be interesting to know. It probably doesn't happen all that often. I mean, but we have a number of structures that are in there. I just don't know how often it comes up, but it might be worth thinking about. I'm not saying that it absolutely can't continue to be this way. It's been that way, I guess, for a long time here, and maybe it's worked out just fine. And we're a small enough place that different, the various people in City Hall that need to chime in on something like that can do it regardless of which body is hearing it. But I do think there might be some merit to looking at, if we, depending on how much of a concern we have about allowing this stuff to happen, whether or not shifting it out of the BZA and more towards the Planning Commission, City Council might be better. Just to provide extra, if we're concerned about allowing, again, building in floodplain, and if we want to be careful about that, cognizant of the extra cost that can result by allowing things to build in floodplain that are vulnerable. I mean, I saw a lot of the model language in there that tries to speak to that as far as advising the BZA how they should consider it. But, I think that in some ways it's a policy issue, whether or not we want to allow, the extent to which we want to allow, expansions and new constructions that, in the floodplain. So anyhow, all that is to say, it doesn't have to be that way. It may be a model that's used in, other parts of the Commonwealth, and it may be fine here, but it doesn't have to be. So you guys should maybe think about it, if it might be better to not have it heard, not to change that aspect of it. I mean, you could look at Fairfax County's ordinance. It is different. They actually do it not, through like special exceptions, or, which we, what they call special exceptions is a little different than the way we use that term here, but it's essentially the same thing. But it doesn't go to the BZA. It goes to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors.
It's something we'll look into, certainly.
Yeah, I think it might be good to look into that and make the decision if we, and maybe, I know you said you're under a time crunch. Maybe it's something you look at changing in a future update. But, the first step, I guess, would be to see how often it's occurred, how many of these cases the BZA has heard. Were there any problems? Were there any sort of like disagreements, with the way they handled it, and the decisions they made? Just because, again, not the people in the BZA can't make decisions, but, it's really a little bit out of their swim lane when you start getting into this type of stuff. They're great at relief from setbacks and other things like that, but, this type of thing, is fairly technical and might be better suited with, other folks.
So I'll certainly look at see how often things have gone to the BZA from a floodplain perspective. And I'll have that for you at the next, on the 17th.
Sure. Appreciate that.
At the very least.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. Anybody else? Mr. Duncan?
Just a couple questions as I'm listening. Thanks for that discussion. That's interesting. So last time the map that we are using now was put in place how long ago?
20 years.
20 years. So basically, the map we've been operating on precedes any of the mixed-use redevelopment that's occurred since the early 2000s here. And where I'm going with that is a question about the economic impact of what we're doing. I mean, for most jurisdictions in the world, 10, 11, 12 properties gaining or losing designation is not a big deal. But here, as we heard tonight with the American Legion House being basically yielded from residential use to just recreational use in order to facilitate stormwater control and management, that's good. what would you say to two questions? One, has the redevelopment of a number of parcels across the city over the last 20, 25 years had any influence on the new map? Do you see changes anywhere in any of the neighborhoods as a result of development in proximity to those houses? And two, what is the aggregate economic potential impact of adding houses into the flood zone that might do what the American Legion did? The city might step in and say, well, we want to discourage construction, additions, tear downs, mega houses, whatever, on those properties, and we'll do so by buying the land as a reservoir literally as a reservoir for stormwater management. So those, I guess, are the two questions I would put to you, just for your opinion.
I feel like this one's a little above my pay grade.
Yes, I can take that. So it is my understanding from FEMA that the only design that changed was better topography mapping, specifically using LiDAR to better determine the actual topography. All of the hydraulics and the analysis of the actual number crunching has generally remained the same with minimal changes throughout the city. And I think throughout the area, I think we just kind of hit like a 20-year trigger on the maps, and they took what they had, bettered the data. It's important to note that from a high-level perspective, FEMA only looks at areas that have a 1 square mile drainage area or more. Put that in perspective, the city's a little over 2 square miles. So they're not looking at something like Shadow Walk, something like Lincoln, any of the kind of the stormwater projects that Mr. Dudley is working on. I note that just so we're kind of starting off all on the same page, that the data has not changed substantially, but given the size of the streams, given this is trips run and 4 mile run, I don't know if that's necessarily the end of the world. We go on for days about changing of the storms and frequency curves through NOAA and all of that. I'll spare the group the engineering behind that. Excuse me. I think from a development standpoint, it was either Tinner Hill or Pearson did what's called a LOMAR. Tinner Hill, thank you. Did a LOMAR when that was built to adjust the floodplain. One of the entrances to the garage was technically in the floodplain, so they had to do some adjustment with some grading. They were able to pull that building out of the floodplain. It was very, very minor. I don't think they actually had to grade anything other than just installing the sidewalk and updating some numbers for their survey. I think the point you make about kind of, I don't know if I want to call them development rights, but development within floodplains and floodways, that's something the city's actively looking to see what properties are on the market, what makes sense to buy, what doesn't make sense to buy. I forget the address, but there's the house that's adjacent to Oak Elementary. We bought that, and I think the lease back ends this year. It might have been in December. I don't quite remember. This year? All right, thank you, Tony. It's this year. So we're always looking to see what we can purchase, what makes sense at the location it's at, right? Is there a future stormwater project we can do? Is it in the floodway? And trying to alleviate some of our issues. Probably the biggest impact that these maps have are along the 4 mile run corridor in terms of development. I'm going to generalize the project and call it the North Washington Corridor Improvement. It's not literally North Washington, but they're through Jefferson, up through there. A lot of those buildings, a lot of those properties are where it's changed. So that would impact whatever type of development were to go in there with the additional parcels, and where the lines change, obviously where you can develop changes with that. I think that would be the biggest impact that we would see from this. But again, the floodplain, for the most part, was already there, was already impacting the parcels. So these are, honestly, the relatively minor changes where something's moved a few feet and it's capturing the back of a parcel. Trips Run in particular is very much like that, where new parcels are being added, but we're not adding any structures. Obviously, 4 Mile Run's got a couple of structures being added, but they're kind of those minute adjustments based on better topography data.
Well, I know this is on a fast track, so I don't want to slow it down. If there's any reference to maps or whatever, everything here in the small town is, small, but that's where we live. So
Yes.
there will be some questions, I think, because you do hear, anecdotally, you hear people saying, oh, my flooding's gotten worse because you put up that big building down the street. Generally speaking, that does not coincide with the efforts that have been made to, improve stormwater quantity and quality management at those new properties. But I just want to take advantage of the opportunity of us looking at this to help the public understand that it's just basically that the land hasn't gotten higher or lower. It's just more accurately measured than it was before.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, the notice letter just came out, so I guess, many of us are trying to grasp it and understand and see what the implication is. But it's mentioned here that Gresham Place is mapped into the floodplain. And I know you followed up and indicated that it just touched on the edge of some common property.
Yep.
And all of the 34 townhouses that are there are not on common property, but on their
Correct.
own fee simple property. So is there any impact on those townhouses?
No.
So
simply
this
no.
is-
It just brushes a sliver of part of the shared
Yes.
area that is all one parcel because, it just traces basically, the outside of the resident or the residential parcels, and it just tips one bit of it. And so that's why the notice doesn't have an address on it, because there isn't an address attributed to that parcel. And I do understand the confusion, but yeah.
I was just trying to figure out what to tell people because they all come to me.
Yeah, no, that makes-
What's this mean?
Yeah.
So I
Just-
just
it
say, well, the
touches
rules
that part of
require sending out a notice. Is that basically it?
That is exactly it. It is. We are just trying to, make sure that we're following
Check
the law.
that
but
box.
It,
Yeah.
it just brushes up against a curb that is just close enough. I think I mentioned it's a matter of like an inch or so, and it is just close enough to require us to tick that box and send out the notification, put the sign out and whatnot.
Okay, I'll let folks know not to worry. All right, thank you.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, I have some. Thank you, Jeff. Nice to meet you in person. We've chatted on the phone before, so nice
And
to
you.
see you here tonight. I was wondering, Mr. Stevens asked about Gresham Place. I was also wondering about Pearson Square. That was also on the list of properties that was mapped into the floodplain. Is it the same case where it's not the building, but it's the land?
I don't recall if it touches the building or not. I don't think so.
Okay, I was
Yeah,
just curious.
sorry.
Either way, the building owner is going to have to
Okay.
procure flood
Yeah.
insurance,
And we
presumably, if
send-
that's required.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate all the careful efforts to get the extra credits to improve our rating. I think it's definitely helpful for homeowners that are carrying flood insurance. I am really glad that you incorporated the fence requirements. I'm just going to read those real quick for my colleagues in case they did not get a chance to read that. So the way that we wrote it is a fence.
It's on page 38 of 49
Yeah, I'm sorry,
of the
Jack, it's
ordinance.
line 1483.
Yeah, that's probably an easier way to say it.
Yeah. So it's no outdoor obstructions in the floodway are permissible except, and then number 5 is a fence which meets all of the previous and following criteria, constructed with open mesh wire fencing of not less than number 9 wire with mesh openings, not less than 6 inches times 6 inches. Fence supports shall be securely anchored in concrete. Isn't that a requirement for all fences? Maybe I'm wrong. No? Okay. And whose wire shall be securely fastened to the supports has been reviewed and approved by the Director of Public Works or designee. So I appreciate the intent, I think, with this, and I believe you told me that this is sort of the language that Alexandria has in their
Yes.
ordinance.
Except it expands to their entire, but like the 1% flood hazard area, their entire flood hazard area.
Not
has
just the
this, not just
floodway.
this. So this is much more
Okay.
restrictive than that.
And the floodway, I think you told me, is 19 properties. Is that right?
That's
Something around there?
Something in there, yeah.
Okay. So I guess my recommendation is just, I think it's a little too specific. I understand why, when you're trying to write these rules, you would want to be specific, but I think, it would be good to give homeowners a little bit of flexibility. Like, for example, in the area around Oak Street Elementary, there's tons of those wooden, like, split rail fences, right? Like, those are going to be far less likely to trap debris in a flood than chain link is. Like, I have pictures of chain link fences with tons of debris trapped in it. So I just feel like there are other styles of fences that homeowners might prefer. And so I think we should write this in a way that is a little broader or a little more general. Some of the language that I've seen from other jurisdictions are things like fences should be designed to minimize disruption to the passage of floodwater, or, Maryland, their model guidance prohibits solid fences, privacy walls, and fences prone to trapping debris unless designed and constructed to fail under base flood conditions. I understand that some fences can have like flaps, like flood flaps installed at the bottom. I want to be able to give homeowners options, and so I think telling everybody you have to have chain link fence if you live in the floodway is not a way to do that. So my recommendation would be to broaden that a little.
Yeah, please.
Yes, and that's actually a discussion we had like 3 hours ago. Actually, it's a little later than I think, so maybe like 5 hours ago. But I'll say comment heard. We are looking at making it a little bit more general. I think our intention is twofold. One, we want water to pass through. We don't want somebody to put up a privacy fence where it's going to stop it. And two, we want what I would call a low maintenance fence, right? So we don't necessarily want a flap that somebody goes, we don't think that looks pretty this year. We can put up a shrub or some landscaping, and now that flap can't operate. So we're looking at some language to free up the type of fence being used, yet at the same time kind of restrict what I would call kind of a high maintenance fence. There are ways to design a fence so that once water starts to build up, it can collapse and kind of fold over. So we're kind of looking at those options right now, and I would expect by the time this comes back to you at the 17th, we'll have some better language in there that reflects that.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And then on Mr. Duncan's, I think, second comment, about the city potentially stepping in certain properties, I just want to remind everybody that there was a proposal in 2019, I think it was, for transfer of development rights. I don't know if you all remember that. I think it was before my time on the commission, so I'm actually honestly not all that familiar with it, but I understand that this body reviewed that and the city council reviewed that and decided not to proceed with that. But that, might be something that we should remind ourselves of, because maybe that was a good idea at the time.
Commissioner, if I could,
Yeah.
just to remind folks who were here at the time or are new since then, so transfer of development rights is a legal tool that is enabled under state legislation, and what it allows you to essentially do is to buy a piece of property on which you could build, say, a single-family house or a duplex or whatever it is, and transfer that development right. So instead of building a single-family house in the floodplain, you would transfer that right so that you could build another single-family house somewhere else that isn't in the floodplain. And so what a lot of municipalities through the Commonwealth have been able to do is use this to either preserve agricultural land or floodplains or whatever ecologically sort of sensitive area it is they want to maintain. So the system you would set up is essentially the city would be sort of buying these properties that are in the floodplain subject to risk, and then to mitigate the cost or cover the cost of that, they could then sell the right to build that house to somebody else. So you're keeping the overall level of density in the city the same, but what you're doing is moving it to a place that's more sort of environmentally minded, getting it out of the floodplain. And as a consequence of that, you also get to pick up all of those spaces as public lands. A lot of people use them for trails or greenways, community gardens, a lot of different options you could use them for. So it is a great way to expand open space, protect from floods, and of course manage costs along the way.
Thank you for that description, Mr.
Yeah.
Stoddard. Appreciate it.
I will say there is some administration involved in it, so it's not like you just sort of say, hey, we want to do this thing, and you have a floodplain and a TDR program. There is more involved in it than that, but that's the basic premise of it.
Didn't we maybe it wasn't development rights. Didn't we buy a house near Ms. Coleman's?
Yeah,
Um,
it's
yeah.
the one that that was mentioned earlier next
Right.
to Oak Street
Right
Elementary.
by Oak Street, right. But that wasn't a TDR, that's just, we just bought it, right?
That's right, and so this.
We bought it, so you could
program-
still use TDR actually if you, because it's still zoned for single-family development, so you can still harvest the value out of those if you were to establish TDR at a later time. So it's not a lost opportunity, you could say we've already got a head start on it.
Okay.
Yep, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Really appreciate the presentation. As was mentioned, this is it's technical stuff, so I think all of the suggestions you heard to make it easier for folks when we go to public hearing on the 17th, will be very useful, especially any details around the maps. And there's a lot here that's tough, I think, for lay people to digest, me included. And anything that's changed from last time to now, I think would be helpful for folks to know. But if there's anything else from the commissioners, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
See you in a couple weeks. All right, moving into item 8, information items, planning commissioners' reports. Any reports from any commissioners? Mr. Duncan.
Just a note that I understand that our fellow commissioner, Mr. Krasner, is one of the stars of the show at a coming VPAS program, perhaps. Just make the public aware of an opportunity to hear his wisdom in another venue.
My arm was twisted they're doing it on the accessory dwelling units. They asked if I would come and talk about Fairfax's experience in the ADUs, and so I told them I would do that. There's another woman coming who's, I think, from the Urban Institute, who's very knowledgeable, just on a more of a policy level. So I'm really just going to talk about a little bit of the experience, that Fairfax had, and, not really out there. I'm not representing the Planning Commission, that's for sure. I'm just representing myself. But just going to talk about how it went there and compare it to our current ordinance and just, things we and the city at large should consider as we embark down that road.
And for whom and when is that?
It's VPAS is doing it on the 16th of April at, I believe, 8 p.m. I think it's 8 to 9:30, but I can confirm that. And I think it's at the community center. I got to check where I'm supposed to go. I forget. They're going to put out some, I think actually today they were going to send out some, informational stuff about it to advertise it in various channels so people know about it. But, so, yeah, it's more just an informational thing for me, just to kind of say, hey, this is what our neighbors went through, and, let's make sure we consider all the different iterations and things we need to think about so we have a good end result.
Great.
Yeah.
Check your inboxes. Sounds like it's very useful.
Do you want to go to more
Others, Ms.
night
Cohen?
meetings?
No, nothing for me.
Looks like 8
Yeah,
o'clock.
just real quickly, I don't have any meetings, but there was a news article that kind of caught my attention. It's from Alexandria, that they're adding protection to a number of bike lanes, King Street, Van Dorn, Seminary Road, and so forth. And basically what they're doing is they're taking places that already have a painted bike lane that doesn't have protection, and just adding a small buffer and some plastic bollards, which look to be pretty inexpensive. But it would convert it into a protected bike lane. So I just thought that's something we should take notice of, and I could see that happening more frequently. And we've got several instances in the city on Maple Avenue that have painted bike lanes but no protection. That something like what Alexandria did might be possible here at a very inexpensive level. So
Makes a big difference, for sure. Other commissioner reports?
I'm sorry. Can I spill over and add one more?
Please.
Thank you. I think that's Miss Underhill in the back. Yes. happened to have been told this morning that she was doing some digging back into the Washington Post archives and came up with a fascinating article written in October of 1980. Washington Post took a really in-depth look at, the situation in Falls Church at that time, which is now 44 years ago. Holy cow. My mother-in-law would have been mayor for about 5 months at that juncture. At any rate, I'm going to circulate it to everybody because it's really definitely worth reading. It makes you feel that there's nothing new under the sun. The same issues that we're discussing here tonight were very much, quality, world quality schools. At the time, we had the lowest tax rate in the region, so taxes were an issue. And just generally, the things that the leaders were grappling with back then are exactly the same things that we're grappling with now. So in some ways, it's reassuring. In some ways, it's like we never can really quite get it all solved, but we keep trying. At any rate, I want to thank Ms. Underhill for coming up with that article, and I'd like to share it with everybody. I'll send it to Jack. Thanks.
Please do. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. All right, if nothing else, move on to Director's Report. Mr. Stoddard.
All right, thank you, Chair. Members of the Commission, I'll actually start with the look ahead because there's we have a scheduling item that I want to sort of raise for June. But if we could go to the look ahead, Mr. Trainer. All right, so at your next regular meeting, the floodplain ordinance comes back to you, and I'll work with Mr. Rubin on that to make sure that you all have a recommended motion in your packet that obviously you can review when the packet is distributed approximately a week in advance of the meeting. We'll also have a work session on the Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District overlay. This has been talked about before. Emily Bazemore is our case planner on that, along with a team of other staffers. We've had a significant level of community engagement and want to bring that draft chapter and map back to you. Let's see, Oak Park Townhomes, they did resubmit today, so we're getting that out for staff technical review and make sure that they sort of positively responded to comments. That's scheduled to come back to you for your, assuming review is satisfactory, scheduled to come back to you for public hearing and final consideration as a site plan item on May 1st. The bike plan, there was some discussion about the bike plan schedule at the mayor's meeting this morning, and I need to find out exactly what that was. So I'm not sure if this schedule is going to hold, but that's what we were operating on. So I'll have to double check that date is going to hold. Comprehensive plan amendment. This is the Tinner Hill District coming back to you for final action. We are working to get that scheduled with council. It may not actually go to council until after you all have acted on it. That is allowed by charter and state code. It's not how we typically do comp plan amendments, but it would be a way to keep this important community project moving while council has their sort of attention on the budget. Demographics chapter coming to you as a work session item. Of course, you've seen it before, and we're revising it, and that would be coming back to you then for final action. And this is where we have a scheduling sort of issue. June 19th is, of course, Juneteenth, so I want to work with you all to move that meeting date. The simplest solution might be to just bump it back 1 week to the following Wednesday to make it the fourth Wednesday in June. We can poll the members after, or we can do I don't know if you want to do a quorum call sort of in between meetings just to see if that other date's going to work.
To talk about it now, you said?
So we would remove, I'm sorry, Paul, we would move.
To move off of Juneteenth and to instead move that, and I don't think everyone has their June calendar settled, but we could do a quorum call for a June 26th meeting.
Is Juneteenth a city holiday? Is Juneteenth a city holiday?
I think it is.
Yeah. So the city's closed that day, right? So we probably wouldn't meet, because we don't usually meet on city holidays.
Right.
Right. So we probably missed that when we adopted our calendar or something.
We've fallen out of the habit of adopting an annual calendar, so we
We should
don't
get back
have
in
that
habit.
built-in check.
Otherwise, how are we going to give ourselves a break? We leave ourselves at the mercy of Mr. Stoddard. We got to, the way around that is
Three items every meeting. That's
we're unable to set the calendar. If we vote on a calendar, we just say, we're not meeting that day, and Mr. Stoddard's hands are tied. So I'll make a motion later that we adopt an annual calendar, but that's,
we can bring that back to you as a future item.
yeah.
All right, so we'll check on that June date.
Can we come back to that at some point, then moving the meeting and?
Yeah, well, what we'll do a quorum call outside the meeting forum, but I just wanted to flag it for you all because we noticed it today. The director's report, a lot of things to celebrate in the director's report, so I just want to introduce them briefly, obviously not go through the substance of them in detail, but I will ask to put them up on the screen at least so you can see how they look. First one is the annual community profile. Zoe LaRive was our lead author on this one, but I will say she wasn't doing it alone. Over 20 members of staff contributed to this year's profile, and that came from authors across 10 different city departments. But this is an annual tradition for us, and this was the one action item that came out of adopting the vision chapter of the comp plan in 2017. The council unanimously acted on the vision as well as the core values, and what we committed to as staff was annually reporting the progress that the community is making against those. So you can see, and then the color changes each year for a little bit of variety. In terms of color selection, if anyone asks, we use Pantone's color of the year, and then we may tweak it to be a little more vibrant. So it gives a little bit of interest to them. And then, of course, we celebrated the 75th year anniversary. So let's see, new color scheme. We highlighted the 75th anniversary. We do try to match up to the annual publication of the year in review. So you'll see we highlight a lot of the same things. And then in prior years, like I said, we used the 2040 vision statement as well as the core principles to structure the document. So that's the annual community profile. We've also noticed it throughout the city's e-focus that's going out tomorrow. Let's see, comprehensive plan, chapter update, and facilities and utilities chapter. Oh, this one might be worth a little bit of discussion. So as we've mentioned a couple times in previous meetings, staff has been looking at initiating some updates to the comprehensive plan. And we don't have to jump to it, but the back of this document is the status report that Emily Bazemore had prepared previously. Zoe LaRive has produced this memo, and it's a look at what does the state code require that utility chapters speak to. It looks at what other communities have done. If we slide down until you find a table. Here we go. She looked at other comprehensive plans that have received some level of planning acclaim and looked at what they generally include in their chapters. How would that fit within the Falls Church framework? And the column on the far right is what she's recommending we include in our chapter update. And then if you scroll down even further, she's got a recommended table of contents. Next page. And so you can see we would try to walk through, we'd obviously introduce the chapter, lay out an overarching vision for utilities and facilities within the city, and then walk through all the component systems: police, fire, emergency services, schools, library, community center, public buildings, water systems, stormwater, wastewater, gas, electricity, broadband. And even though we don't maintain all those systems, right, some of them are partnerships with our other agencies or jurisdictions, it still makes sense to plan for those needs so that we're having the right conversations with them. And with each of those, we would identify existing uses, analysis of any current gaps, analysis of future needs, and a rough estimate of what it would cost to run those systems. And just like the community profile, we aren't going into this alone. We've identified all the partner departments and staff that we would have to work with to pull this off. We're expecting to start this in July after we wrap up the demographics chapter as well as the Tinner Hill district, and so wanted to share the scope of work early. Of course, we've been talking about the status of the comprehensive plan, and now we're getting a little bit more sort of concrete with which chapter we're going to tackle and how we're going to do it. So
Can I ask a question before you leap forward?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's some risk we may get to the end of this meeting without mentioning affordable housing.
Is that here?
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Krasner. I just, as I was glancing through this and the other documents, I'm just wanting to make sure that we are aware of it. You know, that is a topic of interest in the community, obviously, and to the Planning Commission specifically. Does it live somewhere on one of these charts?
It does. And so this is the housing chapter. Remains a topic of interest. There are a number of projects going forward, and I know city staff has been doing a better job of publicizing all the things that are being done on that front. Those efforts are really rooted in the affordable living policy, which is being updated now or soon to kick off, and the housing chapter of the comp plan, which was updated, I think, in 2019. So that's fairly recent policy guidance, and of course, we continue to refine that with the affordable living policy. The utilities chapter hasn't been updated since 2005, and we are running into some significant utility sort of issues, whether it's with wastewater or street lights falling into disrepair, both traffic signals as well as the lights themselves. And so at the staff level, we did think this is one that was sort of worth looking at just to get our heads around sort of what are we looking at in terms of facility investment. But that doesn't mean we slow down on affordable housing because that already has several sort of paths forward at the moment.
So it's under Chapter 10, now housing
Yeah.
a complete community.
Correct.
Can I ask a question about the outline? Like the way I read it, this section is sort of like introduction, all the guts and conclusion. Is there any benefit to sort of breaking up utilities from facilities? So sort of buildings, I guess, facilities, and
So
was there
they were
reason to have
organized
them
a little bit
together?
better?
Yeah, just
I
to
think we
break it
could.
up a little bit more.
Yep. Yeah, I think the big thing is getting a vision statement in there that's sort of similar to the way this year's budget was introduced, this idea of sort of planning for a growing community. I think that'll give us a sense of looking at what we have in our demographic projections, which we're wrapping up now, and what do we expect we're going to need? Is the population getting older? Is it getting younger? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? And just having a sense of what's changing and what are the facilities we need to have on hand to accommodate that.
Also, would it make sense to include renewable energy as one of the dots there? We got gas, electricity,
Yeah. that's a good
increasingly
point.
renewable energy, whether it's the community center, the PV, photovoltaic system on Meridian, and other systems. I think we'll be seeing increasingly more of that.
Yes. Yeah, I think yes.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be just relegated to not that it's relegated, but just in the environment for everyone chapter.
Right. Yeah, that's so it is very common that the chapters have crossover between sort of what someone might think belongs in one chapter can also fit very well in another chapter as well. And so usually we just talk about it multiple times with obviously trying to maintain some level of consistency. We obviously don't want conflict across the chapters.
Speaking of, is like solid waste included here as well in this chapter?
We can double check. I know we just wrapped up our solid waste plan, and I think, actually, Jack, if you can scroll up to the table. Because I think she covered that.
Yeah, it is here.
So
Oh, it's in
no, 'cause
chapter
it's in
5.
chapter 5.
Okay. What is chapter 5? Can you
Zoe's
remind
on
me?
it.
Which one?
What is chapter 5?
Is that the environment chapter? So again, maybe
think it
there,
is.
maybe a reference or
With the environment chapter, it sort of occupied the field by putting up several pages on solid waste, and so I don't want to introduce two different chapters that have multiple pages on the same
I understand that,
topic.
yeah.
But I think here, where we're talking about electricity needs, I think one of the things we can talk about is both for greenhouse gas reduction as well as energy reliability. Right, we can talk about the benefit of renewables as being part of that electric generation and distribution system.
Great.
Let's see, next item. So next one is about, I know it's now been actually a couple months since staff had presented to you an idea for revising the city's accessory dwellings code. We've talked about that a couple times at the staff level. We're still, in some sense, sort of waiting for a good opportunity to engage with council to really kick that off. So one of the things we wanted to look at is we know we've got other things we want to look at within the zoning ordinance. And so we were looking at things that maybe could be done more technically. I mean, they're still going to involve public engagement. It's the zoning ordinance, but more as a technical fix. So another thing we've looked at is older commercial buildings and some of the struggles that they have. And we know we have sort of a council interest in being more business friendly. We've also got obviously community interest in environmental sustainability. And one of the great ways to bring those two things together is to make use of the buildings you already have. That's usually the greenest building you have because there's a lot of embedded carbon in the materials that are there and the waste that goes in with demolition and reconstruction. So, and the reason I bring it up here in the context of the zoning ordinance is we often have a struggle where you've got an older existing commercial building, maybe it was even constructed before parking requirements went into effect, tenant moves out, prospective tenant comes in, and we can't issue them a certificate of occupancy because they can't meet the parking requirements for their particular use. Of course, there's a range of different commercial uses. They all have their different parking requirements. And actually, Jack, if you're able to jump, it's really that table where you walked through sort of the square footage. This is so if you look at, and this is an example of different uses that try to occupy different commercial spaces, whether it's an office use or a professional service or a cafe or a deli or a restaurant, you can see they all have different uses, whether it's, one space for 450 square feet or 300 or 250 or 100. And really that last line really highlights the difficulty of opening up spaces in older buildings. A typical parking space, including its drive aisles, is about 300 square feet. So when we require 300 feet of parking for every 100 square feet of restaurant space, we're actually requiring 3 times as much parking space as we are people space. And so when we say we want more restaurants downtown, well, are we actually letting them move in? And so what this sort of proposal is walking through is what would it look like to revise the zoning ordinance to grant some flexibility for whether it's older buildings or smaller buildings. What would be the right criteria to allow that to be resolved administratively? Because otherwise, these buildings don't really have a path forward through the zoning ordinance, and often they're locked out of particular uses, which I think in a lot of cases the community would enjoy and find beneficial.
Can I just say this table is a really great representation of the nonsensical nature of minimum parking requirements? Makes no sense. So I'm very glad we're tackling this. And hopefully we'll take maybe a smaller bite out of parking here and see that the sky is not falling when we do that. And then maybe we can take a bigger bite at a later time.
We had looked at this at a very light level when we were talking about outdoor dining, and we had talked then about saying, well, gosh, if you've got a building of 20,000 square feet and it's already constructed, just let it go. Just let it occupy with what it wants to occupy. I think in some ways, the reason you have these parking requirements are to avoid sort of undue pressure on public parking. And so the risk is that if you don't require on-site parking, then you'll have a tragedy of the commons and everyone will just use up all the on-street parking. I think you can defend against that pretty well with commercial parking requirements that we've already got in terms of 2-hour parking, and of course that does require some level of enforcement. But also some of this is recognizing that even within these different sort of use classifications, just different businesses operate differently. And even though it's classified as a restaurant use, it may well be able to succeed with a lot less parking than what's shown here. And so that was why staff wanted to take a look at this. I think I've heard that the EDA, the Economic Development Authority, is interested in a sort of a similar relief program. And so I think if you scroll down to the schedule, Jack. We thought that this might be something that could be done in relatively short time if we were to start work on this in April, put out a sort of a draft in May, obviously visit with you all, as well as the EDA and council, make some revisions to the code, and then try to come back for a formal acceptance. Obviously, there's some conflict there with summer schedules, and we'd work through that. No one wants to surprise somebody with a summer zoning ordinance. But it would be seen as a relatively light lift.
I think it's good to attach it to economic development rather than just coming out with eliminating parking minimums as a standalone objective, which I think probably would draw a lot of fire. I don't know how bold you want to be, but if people are concerned about congestion on street parking, there's always that tool that just about every other jurisdiction utilizes. It's called paid parking, or metering parking as a management tool, and then reinvesting the money you get from that into the streetscape in that area to try to help develop it. But that may be too far. But I think what you've put so far in the draft looks like a good project, and I would certainly encourage you to go ahead with it.
Can I follow up and just ask one question about the zoned parking that we've been implementing in different neighborhoods? That allows for 2-hour public parking in all cases?
Generally, yes. So there's some of this is merging the old with the new. So the city zoning ordinance, or not the city zoning ordinance, but the city's parking code lays out a clear default, and that's supposed to be 2-hour parking unless the manager can sort of find otherwise. So when we do roll out zoned parking around new development, and I'll say that the purpose behind that is really to sort of make a lot of these buildings come with transportation demand management plans and parking management plans, and part of the way to make those work is to get rid of all the free parking that's otherwise available around it. And so some of this makes sure that sort of new buildings then don't flood the city with new cars. And the way we can do that is to continue to allow those streets to be used for 2-hour parking during the day, because that can then be used as a community benefit. And then at night, we switch it over, and the hour varies based on where it is. It's 7 p.m. or 9 p.m. It's a lot of that is a community conversation. But then beginning at either 7 or 9 p.m., you need to have a permit from that neighborhood in order to park there. The benefit of that is that people who are already living there really don't see a change in how they use on-street parking, and what it sort of holds off is, like I said, sort of new development, meaning new cars come into the city.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, the parking on those streets is a public resource. So I just want to make sure that we are using it to the best of our ability. I mean, I think when you think about the parking potential, public street parking needs of like the movie theater, for example, like those hours need to be later, right? So.
Yeah, we have hours around that, and of course, Founders Row has 1,000 parking spaces in that garage, which is a pretty tremendous number of parking spaces.
But they're also charging for them, right?
They are, they are. The one thing where I threw out a caveat in the beginning, and the old and the new, and where we had those two things come together was actually on Lawton Street. So Lawton had a pre-existing parking prohibition, and so in order to make that sort of new policy fit with the old policy, we just left that restriction in place.
Got to make compromises sometimes. Yeah, this is great. Sorry, one last thing. I noticed that the person who wrote this level report was Jack Trainer, Senior Planner. Was that a recent promotion?
I have been forgetting to announce this, and I'm
you.
glad you called it out. I'm happy to announce that for Jack's work on a number of efforts, including clerking this body and his work on T-zones, and a number of efforts he's worked on. He's really now worked on a range of projects while he's been here with the city, and he's done it all just wonderfully. And of course, he didn't come here as a novice. He already had years' experience before he showed up here. So I'm very happy to announce that Jack's work has been recognized, and he is now a senior planner with the city.
Congratulations, Mr. Trainer. It's very well deserved.
And it is a great memo. There's a lot of good information in this too, so thank you for that.
And then my last item, I actually won't go into this one in detail before. You've seen it in a similar form before, but recently city staff was before NAIOP, which is an industry group that's involved in land development. So it draws on a range of professionals. It's not just sort of your quote-unquote developer, but it's also attorneys, it's engineers, it's architects. So we were in front of them a couple weeks ago as part of their legislative group, giving them an update on what's going on in Falls Church. This looks a lot like the 5-year outlook, and then we added some new materials as well. And one of the reasons we really like to go out and make these presentations, it's a little bit like going to a restaurant and telling people what we want versus waiting for them to come to us and suggest things, because maybe that's not what we want. And so as you go through this report, if you haven't had a chance to already, it really does lay out the vision that the council and the community have set for itself, and it is rooted in, as I've mentioned it before, that vision statement, the core values, the small area plans, the development concepts we have, and it highlights the kinds of projects that are coming before us and getting approved and constructed, not only redevelopment, but also a lot of the renovations that have been happening throughout the city as well. And so really telling that story that the city has a vision for walkable, vibrant communities, and the kinds of projects and development that have been successful here in Falls Church. So I'll leave my report there.
Mr. Chair? Oh, sorry. This NAIOP presentation, which, is familiar to us from what we've seen before, is the single greatest document that I think we have that you've churned out. I mean,
Well, I didn't do it. Zoe LaRive did this one too.
this is, you corporately, everybody, and I hope everybody up here takes pride in all the accomplishments that are represented in this document. So it's the greatest bedtime reading that the city has put out in my memory. One thing I did want to say about it, just because I'm becoming intimately familiar with the building, the Smoothie King building, the square footage, actually, I think the largest tenant is the physical therapy place. So I don't know what the standards are for how you label a building. Sometimes something becomes, like the Panera building is the Panera building, and I don't think any law was ever passed that made that happen. But I just, since we're touting the square footage that is consumed, the largest square footage in that particular building is physical, with Smoothie King as the number 2. I don't know if you want to give them equal billing or not, but Mr. Stevens and I were both familiar with the physical therapy place, and I'm familiar with the Smoothie King place. At any rate, thanks to everybody who has had a hand in all that's been done here.
It's a great resource, really is.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Stoddard?
That is all for my report. Thank you for letting me go on.
Any correspondence then?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anything else from the commissioners for the good of the order?
I saw a coming soon Paragon Theater's banner at Founders Row 1. I saw, right when you enter the garage, they put up some banners on some saying coming soon.
The date is May 2025.
It's a little bit out in time.
Yeah,
But
soon is
that's
relative.
That's the first actual tangible evidence of even a dream of a theater maybe actually happening. So just whatever that's worth. No promises from me, but the sign is there. So if you're in the neighborhood and you want to just actually see with your own eyes.
Good things.
While it's still there, it's
Actually,
there.
that's a serious. What is the signage situation? I heard something some long time ago about, they're going to add signage to the building to direct you to the theater. Is
Yeah,
that
went to
going through our
the-
process somewhere?
Went to the AAB.
Did it?
Yeah.
Okay.
They reviewed it, gave them some suggestions for changes, so that's the last I saw of it.
Yeah, so as with any major project, they have a comprehensive sign package, and that goes through a process of review and acceptance. I can get you a copy of the package. One thing on the theater, so it's somewhat invisible to the public, although if you know where to look, you can actually see it. So one of the things the council did negotiate for successfully was ongoing construction of the theater as part of the agreement. And so building safety is monitoring them, not only to make sure they're doing it safely, but also they can report out on here's the activity. And actually, if you go along Park Avenue, you can actually see where the roof has been bumped up to accommodate the larger theater format that the new operator has.
Something to look forward to. All right. Ms. Freelander.
Just a quick random question, and I don't know, Paul, if maybe you know the answer. There's a temporary traffic signal that has popped up on the north end of Little Falls Road near the WNOD trail.
Yes.
And is that for the safety of the WNOD trail, or why is that there?
Well, yes, it's for the construction of the WNOD crossings. So, so they've got sort of the construction place going, and that's part of the maintenance of traffic for the WNOD crossings project, where we'll be updating the 4 at-grade crossings coming in from Arlington. So it's Little Falls, Great Falls, Oak, and Spring. We'll be revising those. The approaches will have stamped concrete, sort of red brick pattern, sort of reminiscent of the brick sort of crosswalks throughout the city. But we're trying out a stamped concrete. The paths themselves will have a smooth concrete travelway for the paths themselves, and they're obviously aligned to the dual trails that recently went in. So I probably have a giant smile on my face, and that's because I'm very excited that the crossings are actually being constructed. It's been a long time.
I do want to note that the light that as you're coming
Yeah, you can't see
from
it at all.
Arlington, you can't see it through the.
There's a warning sign,
It's a
so
little
hopefully people
dangerous.
stop. Yeah, we'll
Because
we'll
you
take a
come
look at
through
the
and you're like,
location of
Where is
that.
the light?
Yeah.
Like, but you can't see it, so.
Can I ask, how are the lights going to be used? Like, are they, is it like
We-
in place of flagger, like people?
It is. So because of the length of time that the construction has to be underway and it's next to the fire station, so we always need to maintain one lane operable. So that's a signal that the fire station will be able to use, and we can keep one lane of traffic moving through the work area. For the smaller streets, for Oak and Spring, we'll be able to close those down entirely. We'll keep one open at all times, but we'll just close the entire street, get that crossing repaired, and then switch gears to the other one. It's a much faster construction time than trying to maintain a lane and set up and break down at the beginning and end of each day.
Okay, so I saw the traffic signal on Little Falls and Great Falls. They're not on the smaller streets?
No, Great Falls will obviously also maintain a lane of traffic
Okay,
at all times
so
as
they're
well.
there to maintain that lane?
Yeah.
Okay. Great, cool.
And it's a lot less expensive to roll out a temporary signal than it is to pay for sort of two flaggers.
That was what I was
Yeah.
wondering. Yeah.
Plus a rotation, yeah.
Okay, excellent.
That's great. All right. With that good news, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.